If you think a small-town mechanic can't stand up to a ruthless biker gang, think again. In our story, Oliver Tank Thompson, a seemingly easygoing, big-hearted repairman, shocks everyone by revealing skills honed as an elite Marine sniper. Picture the tension: roaring motorcycles, late-night vandalism, and a terrifying face-off at the old sawmill. Tank leads a daring nighttime infiltration to sabotage the gang's operation, all while racing against time to protect the people he loves. Want to know if his plan works, or if the bikers tighten their grip on Pine Valley? You'll have to hear the whole tale to find out how this high-stakes battle ends. Before we jump in, make sure to subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more thrilling, action-packed stories your way. Stick around to discover Tank's ultimate face-off with the infamous Delgado Gang, and see if courage, unity, and an unlikely hero can truly save an entire community. Oliver Tank Thompson wasn't the kind of man most people assumed had once been a highly decorated Marine sniper. Standing well over 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered, and carrying an extra 100 or so pounds around his midsection, he looked more like an amiable auto mechanic who enjoyed one too many donuts in the morning. Yet beneath the grease-stained coveralls and the easy smile lay a lifetime of discipline, skill, and experience in the most demanding environments imaginable. Pine Valley, his home of the past few years, was a quiet mountain town with a single main road, a smattering of shops, and a kind community that thrived on neighborly bonds. The folks here knew him as Tank because he moved with slow deliberation and an unshakable steadiness, as though he was an immovable fortress. They often remarked he had hands the size of dinner plates and a laugh that could shake the walls. The crisp autumn air smelled of pine needles and wood smoke. Early morning sunlight filtered through the tall evergreens that framed the sky. Tank slid open the creaking doors of his family's old auto repair shop, revealing rows of toolboxes, half-finished projects, and the faint echo of rock music humming from a dusty radio in the corner. It was the kind of day that promised routine: oil changes, tune-ups, maybe a brake job or two if he was lucky. On most days, Tank would hum quietly to himself, greet customers with a grin, and offer them coffee from a dented thermos. But on this particular morning, a ripple of tension coursed through him. He had no logical reason for it yet. It was just a low-level alert that had been ingrained into his psyche from years of military service. His gut sense, as he called it, was never wrong. He wiped a grease-smudged hand across his brow and glanced at the clock on the wall. Bryce, his lanky teenage apprentice, would be in soon. He liked the kid, a bit shy, a bit unsure, but dedicated and bright when it came to engines. Katie, who helped with the office work in her spare time, would also stop by later. She was a college-bound senior with a quick mind and a penchant for organizing chaos, which Tank sorely needed. He thought about how these young folks saw him, an older, fatherly figure who gave them guidance and the occasional life lesson. They didn't know the half of his past, and that was by design. He preferred they see him as a dependable, if somewhat overweight, mentor rather than the ex-soldier who had lived through firefights and seen death more times than he cared to count. Crossing to the service desk, Tank flicked on the overhead fluorescent lights and powered up the security monitors. Pine Valley was almost painfully safe, and the cameras were more of a holdover from the previous owner than an actual necessity. Still, Tank liked them for peace of mind. He'd learned long ago that being prepared wasn't paranoia, it was survival. As the screens blinked to life, he scanned the slow-moving footage of a nearly empty street. A single pickup truck ambled by, a jogger trotted past the cafe, and an older couple stood chatting near the post office. All perfectly ordinary. Yet that nagging feeling remained. Perhaps it was the memory of how places that once seemed peaceful, desolate stretches of desert, remote mountain passes, could suddenly erupt in violence. Or maybe it was just the knowledge that, in the civilian world, trouble often arrived without warning. Drawing a slow breath, Tank moved to the first car of the day, a minivan needing a coolant flush. He wanted to focus on his work and leave the shadows of his past behind. But as he loosened the radiator cap and the first hiss of steam rose, he couldn't fully shake the sense that something dark was on the horizon. He could only hope that Pine Valley and the people he cared about were as safe as they appeared to be. By mid-morning, Bryce had arrived to lend a hand, awkwardly juggling sockets and wrenches as he tried to keep up with Tank's methodical pace. Katie popped in soon after, bringing a thermos of coffee and an armful of folders for the office. She waved cheerily at them both before settling behind the desk. It was a scene as comforting as a warm blanket on a cold day, familiar faces in a safe, predictable routine. Yet Tank's peripheral vision kept drifting toward the security monitors as he worked, and he found himself glancing out the wide-open garage doors more often than usual. At around 10, a peculiar rumble echoed down Main Street. Tank paused, mid-oil check, and peered over the hood of the car he was servicing. Three motorcycles, gleaming with polished chrome and sporting black and crimson paint jobs, rumbled in a slow procession. Their riders wore matching leather vests emblazoned with a snarling wolf's head, accompanied by the words, "Iron Fang Bikers." It wasn't the typical weekend group of motorcyclists passing through for scenic rides. Something about these men's posture, straight-backed, heads swiveling side to side, hinted at more than casual tourism. They were scouting, appraising their surroundings, and it sent a prickle of warning up Tank's spine. Bryce noticed his mentor's sudden stillness. "Everything okay, Mr. Thompson?" he asked, brow furrowed with concern. Katie, too, looked up from her paperwork, sensing the change in the air. Tank forced a reassuring smile, wiping his hands on a grease rag. "Sure," Wei replied, stepping to the garage entrance. "Just some new faces in town." He watched the trio of bikers pass by, their gazes flicking toward his shop with an intensity that made his stomach knot. Each rider wore a helmet with a tinted visor, obscuring their expressions. But in the hush of the moment, Tank felt a silent challenge. These men wanted to be noticed. Or at least, they didn't care who saw them. They circled the block twice more within the hour. By the third pass, Tank knew for certain that they weren't simply lost or admiring Pine Valley's autumn foliage. His prior service in war zones had given him a near-infallible sense of reconnaissance behavior. Whether it was squads in the desert assessing a forward operating base or clandestine insurgents marking targets, the pattern was always the same. Repeated passes, slow observation, deliberate routes. Here and now he saw it in these bikers' movements, and a flicker of old instincts surfaced. Katie strolled over, a file tucked under her arm, and followed Tank's gaze out onto Main Street. "That's the third time they've ridden by," she said, a note of worry in her voice. "Think they're just tourists?" Tank exhaled slowly, mindful that Bryce was within earshot. He didn't want to alarm the boy. "Could be," he said, though he didn't believe it. "Just keep your eyes open, okay? If they come around again, let me know." Katie nodded, returning to her desk but glancing back more than once. Inside the garage, Bryce tried to maintain a facade of calm, but Tank could sense the teenager's nerves. He changed the subject to spare Bryce's anxiety, explaining the importance of torque and how to tighten lug nuts in a star pattern. Yet every so often, Tank's gaze would dart toward the security feeds. The tension in his chest hadn't abated. If anything, it was mounting with each minute that ticked by. He knew that a confrontation in a small town like Pine Valley could be disastrous, especially if no one was prepared for it. While the Iron Fang bikers disappeared from immediate view, they remained a lingering shadow in Tank's mind. He had seen enough in his lifetime to recognize when men like that came looking for trouble. And Pine Valley, for all its neighborly warmth, might not be ready for what was rolling toward it on the rumble of three powerful engines. Lunch hour came and went without the bikers making another appearance, but the uneasy feeling lingered like a lead weight in the pit of Tank's stomach. As he and Bryce closed the hood on a repaired sedan, the sound of footsteps at the garage entrance drew Tank's attention. Standing there was an unexpected visitor, Detective Elena Morales. She was new to the area, having transferred from a city precinct a few months prior. Her sharp brown eyes surveyed the cluttered garage with keen interest, and she held a manila folder in one hand. "Oliver Thompson?" she asked, though she clearly knew who he was. "Mind if we talk for a minute?" Tank wiped his palms on a rag, nodding politely. He gestured for Bryce to grab lunch in the break room, leaving them a semblance of privacy. Katie hovered behind the counter, half listening. Detective Morales approached, her expression taut. "I hear you had some visitors ride through town this morning. People mentioned bikers, possibly scouting the area." Tank stifled a grimace. "They passed by a few times, yeah. Is there something I should know?" Morales sighed, opening the folder. Inside were pictures, grainy surveillance stills of men wearing leather vests that read, Iron Fang bikers. Some photos showed the men brandishing weapons, others depicted them in heated confrontations in different towns. They're more than just a biker gang, she explained, keeping her voice low. We suspect they have ties to organized crime, possibly tied to drug and weapons distribution networks. That old tension in Tank's gut flared. And they're in Pine Valley now, he said, keeping his tone level, though inside he felt the flicker of protective rage. She nodded. They're known for strong-arm tactics, intimidation, vandalism, and worse. Small towns are easy targets for them. They start by offering protection to local businesses, then escalate if refused. Katie's eyes widened as she eavesdropped. Tank caught the expression on her face and felt a pang of guilt. This wasn't the kind of trouble any of them deserved, least of all a young college-bound woman. He turned back to Morales. So what do you need from me? Her gaze flicked to the corners of the garage, noticing the cameras. You've got decent security here, and I know from some folks around town that you're ex-military. Word is you keep your eyes open. She didn't say sniper, but Tank sensed she might suspect it. He rarely discussed that part of his life, preferring to let people assume he was just a regular Marine who did his tour. I look out for my neighbors is all, he replied, voice carefully neutral. Morales offered a tight smile. That's exactly what we need. Officially, we're monitoring these bikers, but we don't have the manpower to put a tail on each of them. If you see anything suspicious, license plates, unusual gatherings, or even overhear something, call me. She handed him a business card. Anything at all. Tank took the card, glancing at the bold print of her name and rank. It felt like stepping onto a narrow bridge, uncertain what lay on the other side. He tucked the card into his coveralls. Sure thing, detective. Just want Pine Valley to stay safe. She nodded. So do I. This is my home now, too. Closing the folder, she added in a softer tone, and watch your back. These guys don't take kindly to interference. Her words rang in Tank's ears as she left. He had never doubted the danger the bikers posed, but hearing it from an official source only cemented his fears. As Katie approached, face pale with concern, he forced a reassuring nod. Everything okay? She asked, voice trembling slightly. Just a precaution, Tank lied, not wanting to burden her with the full weight of the situation. Focus on your work, keep an eye out for anything off. Let me handle the rest. He could almost taste the tension in the air, thick as oil on the shop floor. The Iron Fang bikers were no random travelers. They were predators, circling, and Pine Valley was their prey. Tank felt the old instincts stir within him, the readiness, the silent counting of potential threats and exits. If trouble came to his doorstep, he knew how to respond. Yet a question nagged at him. How far would these bikers go to prove their dominance, and how many innocent people might get caught in the crossfire? 2 days later, the temperature in Pine Valley dropped noticeably, hinting at the approach of a harsher autumn. The shift in weather mirrored the palpable tension in town. Rumors of the Iron Fang bikers had begun to swirl among the locals. Paula, the head nurse at the nearby clinic, quietly informed Tank that she'd treated 2 patients who admitted they'd been roughhoused by men matching the bikers' description. Reggie, owner of the local diner, reported that a tough-looking stranger had dropped in and asked intrusive questions about who runs things around here. Even the normally stoic postmaster, Mr. Harlan, mentioned seeing unfamiliar faces loitering near the bank. Tank tried to go about his usual business, tuning engines, fixing transmissions, aligning wheels, but he couldn't ignore the flurry of small incidents piling up. Each one might be minor on its own, but combined, they painted a picture of a quiet siege. Bryce, who had overheard bits of conversation, grew increasingly jumpy. He asked Tank if he should quit and leave town for safety, but Tank assured him that as long as they stayed alert and worked together, things would be fine. Katie, meanwhile, was valiantly trying to keep the shop's paperwork in order, but every time the phone rang, she jumped. Detective Morales dropped by again, frustration etched into the furrow of her brow. She'd caught wind of half a dozen intimidation reports, yet official police response was slow. Some officers, she confided to Tank in hushed tones, seemed reluctant to engage. Whether that stemmed from fear or corruption, she wasn't sure, but it meant Morales was effectively on her own, aided only by a handful of reliable deputies. Over coffee in the back office, they spoke in subdued voices. Delgado, Morales said, tapping a photo clipped inside a thick file. It showed a tall, lean man with a cold stare and a scar along his jaw. He's the local leader of the Iron Fang. At least, that's what my sources suggest. Ex-military, possibly a dishonorable discharge. He's been credited with orchestrating multiple expansions of the gang's territory. Tank studied the photo, his jaw tightening. Ex-military explained the discipline he'd sensed in those initial scouting passes. He recalled the purposeful way the bikers had moved, almost like a small tactical unit. So he's no amateur, Tank said quietly. He'll be systematic, methodical. Morales nodded. And ruthless. They start by demanding protection fees. Small amounts at first, maybe a couple $100s a month. If businesses refuse, they escalate. Broken windows, threats, sometimes worse. By the time people realize how serious it is, they're too scared to talk. Tank rubbed a calloused hand over his chin. He pictured the friendly smiles of the local shop owners, the kindly farmers who brought him produce as payment, and the children walking home from the elementary school just down the street. He remembered places overseas that started off calm before descending into terror. This time, the battleground was a place he considered home. Morales must have sensed his turmoil. "You don't owe this town anything," she said softly as though reading his mind. "I know your past might make you want to stay out of it." Her words lingered, stirring old ghosts within him. Tank had chosen Pine Valley precisely because it felt like the opposite of conflict. Still, he wasn't the type to step aside when bullies threatened people he cared about. "This is my home now," he replied firmly, his expression darkening. "I won't let them tear it apart." A thin smile crept across Morales's lips. "I had a feeling you'd say that." They hashed out ideas over the next half hour, encouraging business owners to install security cameras, quietly gathering witness statements, and setting up a tip line where people could report sightings of the Iron Fang. It was all early-stage planning, lacking the manpower and resources for a full confrontation. But it was a start, a small stand against the growing menace. By the time Morales left, the sun was dipping behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the dusty floor of the garage. Bryce and Katie had already gone home. The shop felt eerily quiet. Tank spent a few minutes organizing tools, a mechanical ritual that soothed him. Yet the clang of metal against metal seemed to resonate with a harsher echo, as though the town itself recognized the oncoming storm. Standing there, alone in the gathering dusk, he felt the weight of responsibility pressing on his shoulders. He might have left the Marine Corps behind, but some duties were inescapable. And if Lucian Delgado and his Iron Fang bikers insisted on bringing violence to Pine Valley, Oliver Tank Thompson would be waiting, no matter the cost. A restless night gave way to a morning that felt ominously still. Tank woke before sunrise, haunted by half-remembered dreams of desert patrols and echoing gunfire. He dressed in his usual coveralls, made a mug of strong coffee, and stepped outside to watch the sky lighten over the tree line. The cool air did little to wash away the sense of impending confrontation. Shrugging it off, he climbed into his battered pickup truck and drove to the shop, determined to keep his routine, if only to reassure Bryce and Katie that life was still normal. He arrived to find Detective Morales already waiting in the lot, leaning against her unmarked sedan with a grim look on her face. "We need to talk," she said in lieu of greeting. Tank's heart sank. Nothing good came from that tone. He ushered her inside the garage, mindful that the morning had yet to bring curious bystanders. She wasted no time. "We got a report late last night," Morales began, arms crossed over her chest. A small business near the outskirts of Pine Valley refused to pay a so-called protection fee to someone claiming to represent Delgado. An hour later, the place was torched, still standing, but badly damaged. Nobody was hurt, thank God, but it's a clear escalation. Tank felt a surge of anger. He'd driven by that small business many times, a family-owned antique store that specialized in local crafts. The owners were elderly, sweet-natured folks who could barely make ends meet, let alone pay off gangsters. And now their livelihood lay in charred ruins. "Have you talked to them?" he asked, voice tight. Morales nodded. "They're scared stiff. They recognize the men who came by, but they're too terrified to point fingers officially." It's a pattern I've seen before. Fear keeps people silent, which allows the Iron Fang to operate with impunity. Tank found himself pacing across the concrete floor. Is there any chance we can get outside help? State troopers, national agencies? Morales sighed, her shoulders drooping. Resources are stretched thin. We're trying to loop in a federal task force, but that might take time. Right now, it's me, a handful of local officers, and anyone else willing to stand up. Which brings me here, she said, eyeing Tank. Your shop has cameras, and you have combat experience. If we can't rely on official reinforcements yet, we might need to start organizing ourselves. In that moment, Bryce stepped in, overhearing enough to blanch. Organize ourselves like a militia? His voice cracked slightly. Tank shook his head. Not a militia, kid. We're just making sure we're not caught off guard. Morales leaned in, voice tight with urgency. The Iron Fang thrives on intimidation. If the town stands together, they might reconsider. If we hide, they'll pick us off one by one. We have a chance to nip this in the bud if we can show some collective backbone. Tank's thoughts churned, recalling how small communities in war-torn regions had banded together under dire threats. But that was overseas, under vastly different circumstances. This was small-town America. Could Pine Valley muster the unity needed to push back against a criminal gang? He realized it might be their only choice. So what do you propose? He asked quietly. She handed him a paper with addresses and phone numbers of key business owners. The diner, the pharmacy, the hardware store, the local motel. I've been gathering folks who might be willing to participate in a community watch. If you can help coordinate, set up a quick response network, share camera feeds, that kind of thing, we might stand a chance until more official help arrives. Bryce hovered in the background, looking anxious. Tank gave him a reassuring nod, then looked at the list. All right, he said at last. I'll do what I can, but Delgado's not going to like it. Morales offered a wry smile. He won't, but we're out of options. Their conversation ended when Katie arrived, balancing 2 cups of coffee and a box of donuts. The sight of her cheery expression, so unaware of the heaviness in the air, struck Tank hard. He hated that this darkness had descended on the innocence of Pine Valley. As Morales departed, Tank turned to Bryce and Katie, explaining in hushed tones the need to organize and be watchful. Katie nodded solemnly while Bryce swallowed hard. Neither argued. In the silence that followed, all three understood that this was no longer a matter of if the Iron Fang would escalate, but when. The comfort of routine had been shattered, replaced by a determined resolve to protect their town. As they pulled out the phone numbers and started planning, Tank felt a familiar sense of readiness settle over him. He might have left the battlefield behind, but if war came knocking, he knew how to fight for what mattered. Word traveled fast through Pine Valley's grapevine, and within 2 days, Tank found himself at a secret gathering in the back room of the local diner. The venue was chosen for its warmth and familiarity. Reggie's Diner had always been a community hub, where families met after Sunday church or farmers gathered before dawn. Now, tables had been pushed aside to accommodate a half-circle of chairs. A hush fell over the group as Detective Morales addressed them, with Tank standing quietly by her side. We're not here to form a vigilante squad, Morales began, scanning the worried faces. We just need to coordinate. The Iron Fang bikers are using fear as a weapon. If we stand together, we lessen its impact. Her voice carried the steady authority of someone used to taking command, yet Tank could see the exhaustion in her eyes. There were about a dozen people present. Reggie himself had locked the front door and dimmed the lights to avoid attention. Paula from the clinic sat nearby, wringing her hands. Mr. Harlan, the postmaster, was there, along with Gabriel, the hardware store owner who had apparently lost business ever since rumors of the gang spread. Katie and Bryce huddled in the back, note-taking and filming the meeting for those who couldn't attend. Morales laid out the minimal intelligence they had, the approximate number of bikers, likely led by Lucian Delgado, and a pattern of increasing intimidation. She urged everyone to report suspicious activity immediately and to consider installing extra security measures. When she finished, Tank stepped forward, feeling a wave of old anxiety at the idea of briefing civilians, but also knowing it had to be done. He cleared his throat, scanning the circle. Look, I'm not one for speeches, he said, voice gruff. Some of you know I served in the military. I've seen how groups like this operate. They strike fast, pick off easy targets, and rely on chaos to protect themselves. He paused, remembering dusty roads and ambushes far away. But I've also seen how communities can resist. We don't want to fight, but if it comes, we need to be ready. That means looking out for each other. A murmur of agreement rippled through the group, though fear was evident in many eyes. Paula raised her hand. What happens if they target the clinic again? They already poked around once, asking for patient records. Her voice quivered with a concern. Morales jumped in. They might try to control medical access if they escalate. We can help you secure the doors, maybe install cameras to catch anyone trying to break in. Tank's gaze flicked to Bryce and Katie, who both nodded solemnly, volunteering to help set up digital surveillance. Reggie offered to provide a line of communication through the diner's phone, and Mr. Harlan said he could stash emergency supplies in the post office basement if needed. It was a patchwork of small resources, but collectively, it felt like a lifeline. Still, the meeting's mood was somber. Gabriel, leaning on his cane, voiced a grim truth. Pine Valley's a small town. We don't have money or manpower. If Delgado decides to roll in with a dozen armed men, what do we really have to stop them? A heavy silence followed. Tank swallowed hard, aware that indeed there was no cavalry waiting to sweep in. Morales squared her shoulders. We have me, and we have some good officers. We're trying to get outside help, but it's slow. That's why we need your eyes and ears. The meeting ended with a promise to reconvene in a week, or sooner if something urgent arose. People trickled out in pairs, speaking in hushed tones, as though even the walls might have ears. Tank stayed behind, helping Reggie stack chairs. You think we stand a chance? Reggie asked softly, pressing a sweaty handkerchief to his brow. I've never seen the town like this. Everyone's so on edge. Tank placed a reassuring hand on the man's shoulder. I can't promise there won't be trouble, he said gently, but I've seen determined people hold their ground against worse odds. The key is to not let fear divide us. Reggie nodded, offering a weak smile. Guess that's all we can do. Outside, the night was unnaturally quiet. Street lights cast long shadows on the pavement, and leaves rustled in a chilly breeze. As Tank headed to his truck, he couldn't shake the feeling that something dark lurked beyond the glow of those street lamps, waiting for the right moment to strike. Gripping the steering wheel, he remembered the eyes of the townsfolk who looked to him for some form of leadership. It was a role he'd never sought, but fate had placed him at the forefront. He drove home with the windows rolled down, letting the cold air keep him alert. Memories flashed of distant war zones, where he'd stayed up nights scanning the horizon for enemy movement. This time, the fight was in a place he loved. As he pulled into his driveway, an old ache settled in his bones, a mix of dread and determination. Pine Valley had become his family, and he would not abandon them to Delgado's cruelty. Whether the Iron Fang realized it or not, they had awakened in him the same protective instinct that had once made him a lethal force in the military. And if they insisted on a confrontation, Tank would ensure they regretted ever underestimating the big mechanic with a quiet demeanor and a sniper's precision. Within days, Pine Valley's anxious undercurrent morphed into a simmering sense of impending conflict. Reports of nighttime vandalism filtered in, a rock thrown through the bakery window, the hardware store's lock tampered with, and a cryptic threat graffitied on the side of an elderly couple's barn. The phrase "pay or pray" was scrawled in jagged black letters, words that seemed to confirm the Iron Fang's presence was no bluff. Tank, having installed additional security cameras around his shop, spent his evenings reviewing grainy footage that showed the silhouettes of motorcycles passing by, lingering for a moment, then revving away into the darkness. The recurrences were not random. They followed a pattern. Like a predator circling before the kill, these bikers appeared to be analyzing every weak spot Pine Valley had to offer. One evening, well past closing time, Tank stood in his cluttered office, a single desk lamp illuminating stacks of auto parts catalogs, repair invoices, and a budding collection of intelligence notes. On the computer screen, a live feed showed the empty street in front of his garage. The quiet hiss of the old fluorescent fixture overhead seemed almost too loud in the stillness. From a corner speaker, Katie's voice crackled to life through a walkie-talkie they'd started using. "Tank, you there? The system just flagged movement by the old sawmill, she reported, sounding uneasy. Tank perked up, stepping closer to the computer. He switched the feed to the sawmill camera, which they'd managed to set up covertly in a nearby tree. At first, he saw only darkness, then faint beams of light bouncing off rusted metal. A group of riders, at least 5 or 6, congregated near the entrance. While the image was too grainy to catch details, the flash of a backpatch was unmistakable. "Got it," Tank murmured into the walkie-talkie, adrenaline spiking. "I'm on my way. Stay on the line." Leaving the office lights on, he locked up the garage, hopped into his truck, and drove toward the sawmill on the outskirts of town. Pine Valley's narrow roads were empty at this hour, the street lights casting yellow cones of light onto deserted pavement. The sawmill had been defunct for years, just a skeleton of a building where kids sometimes dared each other to explore. Now it seemed the Iron Fang had found a use for it. Parking at a safe distance, Tank killed the engine and stepped out into the crisp, silent night. He advanced on foot, each step carefully placed to avoid crunching gravel. Military habits were hard to break. A faint glow emanated from inside the main building, accompanied by the low murmur of voices and the occasional clink of metal. Through a broken window, he glimpsed shapes moving around. One wore a vest with the Iron Fang emblem, confirming his worst suspicions. His heart pounded as he realized they might be stockpiling something: boxes, barrels, or worse. If Delgado planned on turning Pine Valley into a base of operations, the sawmill's secluded location would be a prime spot for illicit activities. Tank sank behind a row of warped pallets, raising the night vision monocular he'd tucked away in his jacket. He scanned the interior, straining to identify faces or objects. His pulse hitched when he recognized a tall figure with a distinct scar along his jawline. Even with minimal light, there was no mistaking Lucian Delgado. The man gestured to a crate on the ground, and 2 bikers pried it open. Tank couldn't make out the contents from his angle, but the posture of the men suggested something significant, like guns or other contraband. As he crouched, a cold wave of realization struck him. The Iron Fang wasn't just shaking down local businesses. They were likely setting up a major distribution point here, bringing in heavy weaponry or drugs to solidify their stranglehold. Pine Valley was on the verge of becoming a criminal stronghold if Delgado's plan succeeded. Tank's mind raced. Confronting them alone would be suicide. He was outnumbered and outgunned, yet he couldn't simply walk away. He snapped a few photos with his phone, capturing Delgado's face in the crates. Then he crept back the way he came, breath catching every time his foot brushed against loose debris. Back in his truck, hands shaking, he radioed Katie. "They're stockpiling something," he whispered, glancing in the rearview to make sure no one followed him. "Could be weapons. Delgado's there." Katie's voice shook with both fear and resolve. "We need to show Detective Morales. She's still working with that federal agent, Carter, right?" "Yeah," Tank replied, heart still hammering. "This changes everything. They're not just extorting shops, they're setting up a hub." He drove back slowly, headlights off until he reached the main road. Part of him felt relief at escaping unseen, but a heavier realization pressed down on him. The stakes were now astronomically higher. This wasn't just a handful of bullies. This was an organized crime ring bringing serious firepower into an unsuspecting town. Pine Valley's community watch efforts might be commendable, but it wasn't enough to counter an arsenal. By the time Tank returned to his garage, the eastern horizon was streaked with pale gray. He parked inside, shutting the doors behind him. Staring at the new photos on his phone, he was painfully aware that the simple life he'd built here was crumbling under the shadow of something far more sinister than he'd ever anticipated. For the first time since the Iron Fang arrived, he felt not just anger, but a stab of genuine fear for the people of Pine Valley and for himself. Detective Morales was at the garage by noon the next day, sporting a harried look that suggested she'd skipped both breakfast and her usual coffee. Special Agent Cassandra Cass Carter, newly arrived from a federal task force, accompanied her, a tall, angular woman with alert hazel eyes. They spread out a series of documents and laptop equipment on Tank's cluttered workbench, transforming the space into an impromptu command center. Katie hurried over from the front office while Bryce hovered in the background, curiosity and anxiety mingling on his face. Carter opened with a measured, professional tone. Mr. Thompson, Detective Morales briefed me on what you saw at the sawmill. We have reasons to suspect that Delgado's crew is part of a larger ring. The cargo you described could be weapons or high-grade narcotics. Either way, it's significant. She paused, brushing a loose strand of hair from her cheek. Any photographs or footage you can share would be invaluable. Tank nodded, queuing up the images on his phone. He hesitated for a moment, recalling the risk he took sneaking so close to Delgado's men. But if shining a federal spotlight on the Iron Fang was Pine Valley's best chance, he'd gladly expose whatever evidence he had. Within minutes, Carter was peering at grainy stills of Delgado's scarred face and the crates strewn around the sawmill. She pressed her lips into a thin line. Good. This is exactly the kind of intel we need for a federal investigation. Still, we'll need more if we're to mobilize a larger force, enough to convict Delgado's entire network. Otherwise, he'll bail out with corporate backing and reappear in another town. Katie's eyes widened at the mention of corporate ties. Corporate? You mean big companies are funding these bikers? Morales answered, our preliminary data suggests that the Iron Fang isn't just a loose gang. They're likely getting major funding funneled through shell corporations, allowing them to buy guns and bribe officials. They operate in small towns to avoid heavy scrutiny, building smuggling corridors right under everyone's nose. Tank let out a low whistle. This was a far cry from a ragtag group of thugs looking for a quick score. It explained their organized tactics, their well-timed intimidation campaigns, and the hush money that seemed to mute local law enforcement. Special Agent Carter produced a satellite image of Pine Valley's outskirts. She tapped an area near the sawmill. I can call in a specialized team if we confirm there's large-scale distribution. But we have to be certain. Federal resources are stretched thin, and we can't just storm in without hard evidence. Bryce, up until then silent, stepped forward. We've been expanding our camera network around town, he said, voice cracking slightly with nervousness. If we place a few more near the sawmill, maybe we'll catch them moving the contraband. Carter arched an eyebrow. That's risky. If they spot you, you could be in serious danger. Katie chimed in. We're careful. We do it late at night using small camouflage cams. Plus, we can set them to transmit to an off-site server. Even if the Iron Fang destroys them, the footage gets saved. A flicker of admiration crossed Carter's face. All right, but do not go alone. Wait for backup if possible. Morales nodded in agreement. We can't afford casualties. Delgado won't hesitate to eliminate threats. Tank clenched his jaw, memories of lethal engagements flashing behind his eyes. He recalled how easily a single gunshot could silence a witness. The knowledge that local kids like Bryce and Katie were stepping into this danger rankled him. But he also recognized their determination. They were part of a generation that refused to be cowed, especially on their home turf. Stepping away from the group, Tank rifled through a storage locker and pulled out a dusty blueprint of the sawmill's property lines, something he'd found years ago when rummaging through old town records. Unfolding it, he spread it across the bench. Here, he said, pointing to a row of trees near the perimeter fence. If we set up cameras there, the line of sight should cover the main loading bay. We might also want one near the side entrance. Carter nodded thoughtfully, making notes on a notepad. Good call. We'll plan a covert op. If we can catch them in the act, I can file for immediate federal intervention. It wasn't a solution that promised overnight success, yet the sense of momentum was palpable. For the first time, they had a federal agent on site, a solid plan to gather incriminating evidence, and a list of local allies willing to risk their safety. Outside, the midday sun beamed down on Pine Valley, painting a deceptively peaceful picture. But inside this garage, a group of determined individuals prepared to challenge a criminal network that had laid claim to their town's future. As Carter and Morales packed up their gear, Tank held back, arms crossed over his broad chest, gazing at the blueprint. He could almost see the confrontation unfolding. Delgado's men scouring the tree line, armed to the teeth, and himself lying in wait, harnessing old sniper instincts he'd tried to bury. The thought sent a shiver of both dread and resolve through him. He had chosen Pine Valley to escape violence, but now violence had come to him. And if he had to turn the small garage into a strategic nerve center for a covert war, so be it. Night fell early, bringing a chill wind that rustled the pines around Pine Valley. Tank, Bryce and Katie found themselves creeping through the outskirts of the sawmill's property, accompanied by a single local deputy, Officer Chung, who Morales trusted. Under a thin moon, they carried camouflage trail cameras, the kind hunters used for monitoring wildlife. Their plan was straightforward. Place the cameras at key vantage points, ensure they had a stable wireless connection, and get out before anyone spotted them. Despite the tension, Bryce's youthful bravery shone through. He clutched a camera to his chest as he inched along, occasionally glancing back at Tank for reassurance. Katie, for her part, carried a small laptop and a portable modem in her backpack, ready to link the cameras to a hidden cloud server. Officer Chung took the lead, scanning the dark perimeter with a flashlight set to its lowest beam. Tank, wearing a dark jacket that blended with the shadows, couldn't shake the sensation of being back on a mission. The hush of the night, the adrenaline coursing through his veins, and the discipline with which he moved, it all stirred memories he'd long tried to suppress. He inhaled the cold night air, letting it anchor him in the present. This wasn't a foreign battlefield. These were his neighbors, kids he cared about, a deputy risking his career, and a small town depending on them. They reached the first spot near a line of trees overlooking the sawmill's loading bay. As Bryce set the camera, Katie booted up the laptop. The flicker of the screen looked painfully bright in the darkness, and Tank instinctively positioned himself between it and any potential onlookers. "Connection's good," Katie whispered, tapping a few keys. Her breath condensed in the frigid air. "Camera 1 is live." Officer Chung cast a wary glance toward the sawmill. Occasional noises drifted on the breeze. Metal scraping, a faint rumble of engines. "I heard Delgado move some of his men out," he said softly. "But we can't be sure they're all gone." Tank nodded grimly, recalling how the Iron Fang operated, unpredictably, with rotating crews. If Delgado suspected law enforcement eyes on him, he might shift locations or reduce his visible presence. Still, he wouldn't abandon a strategic spot like the sawmill without a fight. They moved to the second location, near a collapsed section of fencing that offered a view of the side entrance. This time, Katie stayed at a slight distance, pointing out the angle she wanted the camera to capture. Tank crouched, methodically attaching it to a thick branch. His breath caught when a sudden roar of a motorcycle engine cut through the night. For a few tense seconds they froze, hearts pounding, scanning the darkness. The engine revved once more, then faded away, leaving only the whistle of wind through the trees. "Let's hurry," Chung murmured. Within a few minutes, camera 2 was operational. Bryce tested the feed on Katie's laptop, giving a thumbs up. The real test would be whether these cameras stayed hidden long enough to catch any incriminating evidence. Tank exhaled slowly, trying to keep his composure, though his pulse hammered in his ears. They were preparing to leave when Katie's laptop pinged, a motion alert from camera 1. She turned the screen so the others could see. The feed showed a pair of silhouettes wandering near the loading bay, their shapes dark against the faint glow of an overhead lamp. They moved with a sluggish gait, carrying what looked like a large container between them. "Could be a fuel canister," Bryce whispered, leaning closer. "Or some sort of equipment." Tank stared at the silhouettes, adrenaline prickling under his skin. One figure paused and lit a cigarette, the flare briefly illuminating the Iron Fang patch on his vest. That was all the confirmation they needed. Delgado's men were still using this place, even at this late hour. If the cameras continued to roll, they might capture the exact nature of the cargo being moved. "Time to go," Tank said, voice low but urgent. "We can't risk them spotting us." Officer Chung nodded, and they retraced their steps carefully, passing through the same trees and rubble. Each crunch of gravel underfoot felt deafening. When they finally reached the safety of the road, Katie quickly shut down her laptop to avoid drawing attention from any passing vehicles. It wasn't until they piled into Officer Chung's unmarked car that any of them dared speak above a whisper. "First step done," Katie said, trying to inject some optimism into her trembling voice. "Now we just have to wait." Tank gazed out the window at the dark silhouette of the sawmill shrinking behind them. It felt surreal, a clandestine operation in a sleepy mountain town he once believed would be his refuge from all forms of conflict. And yet, seeing those Iron Fang patches glint in the lamplight confirmed his resolve. If Delgado thought Pine Valley was ripe for the taking, he'd learned the hard way that even small communities could fight back when they had the will. And in Tank's case, a lifetime of skills from a past he could no longer hide. The following morning dawned with an almost unnerving sense of normalcy. Sunlight streamed through the pines, and birds chirped as though Pine Valley wasn't teetering on the edge of a criminal takeover. Tank arrived at his garage early, as usual, a coffee in hand. He spent the first hour changing tires on an old pickup, all the while stealing glances at the laptop that displayed the new camera feeds from the sawmill. Bryce joined him shortly after, stifling yawns. The teenager had stayed up well past midnight analyzing initial recordings. "We didn't get anything too dramatic," he reported, voice husky from lack of sleep. "A couple of guys moved in and out with some boxes, but we couldn't see what was inside." Tank studied the feed now, where the sawmill appeared quiet. "Keep an eye on it. They might have a schedule. Could be every few nights they bring in supplies." Katie walked in, balancing a tray of donuts and a notepad. "You two look terrible," she teased gently, setting down the tray. "I brought sugar and coffee, and there's more activity on social media. People around town are starting to talk about strange motorcycles idling outside their homes at night." Tank grimaced. Social media chatter meant rumors would spread, possibly scaring folks even more. But it could also serve as a warning network. If they're stepping up intimidation, Delgado must sense we're onto him. We need to be ready for a confrontation. Just then, Detective Morales' unmarked car screeched to a halt outside. She emerged looking visibly rattled. "We've got trouble," she said, striding into the garage. "A local merchant, Gabriel at the hardware store, received a direct threat. They want a chunk of his monthly revenue, or else they'll burn him out. He's too scared to pay or talk openly, but he called me to ask for help." A hot flash of anger spiked through Tank. Gabriel was a soft-spoken man who could barely run the store since his wife passed. "Do we have enough to arrest them?" he asked, fists clenching. Morales shook her head, frustration etched into her features. "No direct evidence of who made the threat. Gabriel's phone call was from a blocked number. The Iron Fang thrives on intimidation without leaving a paper trail." Katie paced the office area, arms crossed. "This is going to escalate. They're either going to terrorize us into compliance or pick off businesses one by one. The cameras at the sawmill might help, but it won't stop them from harassing people in town." Morales nodded grimly. "True, that's why I spoke with Special Agent Carter this morning. She's in the process of requesting more federal presence, but it'll take time. She wants me to advise you all, stay vigilant. If Delgado senses an organized resistance, he might lash out hard." The word "lash out" hung in the air, filling the garage with an uncomfortable tension. Bryce and Katie exchanged worried glances. Tank inhaled deeply, fighting the urge to unleash the fury growing inside him. He was once a sniper accustomed to pinpointing threats from a distance, but this was different. Here, the threat was personal, woven into the lives of people he saw every day. Pulling himself together, Tank tapped a pen against a map of Pine Valley pinned to the wall. "All right, let's think strategically. If Delgado hits a place, it'll likely be late at night, or maybe in the pre-dawn hours. We can set up watchers near the main targets, the diner, the hardware store, maybe the clinic. We coordinate by walkie-talkie or phone. If the bikers show, we call it in." Morales agreed, her eyes sparking with relief at having a plan. "Yes, that's good. I've got 2 deputies I trust, Chung and Rivas, who can rotate on patrol. Carter can't send more feds yet, but she'll come by to help you coordinate." Bryce raised a tentative hand. "What if they split up? Hit multiple spots at once? We're spread thin." "That's exactly their style," Morales replied soberly. "We do what we can. We document, we gather evidence, and we protect who we can. If all goes well, we'll nail them with enough federal charges to shut them down. If not—" She trailed off, the implication clear. In the silence, Tank recalled the sly grin on Delgado's face in those sawmill photos. Men like that thrived on fear and chaos. They enjoyed watching communities crumble under threats. But Pine Valley was not just any community. It was a place where stubborn, big-hearted people looked out for one another. And in Tank, Delgado had unwittingly awakened an old warrior spirit. "We'll hold together," Tank said, voice steady as he locked eyes with Morales. "We might be outnumbered, but we're not alone. And Delgado, he'll learn that messing with a man who's defended ground under fire is a serious mistake." A chorus of determination flickered through the small group. Katie nodded firmly. Bryce tried to smile despite his nerves, and Morales gave a resolute nod. For all their fear, they had each other, a makeshift team bridging age, profession, and experience. With any luck, that unity would be enough to fend off the darkness creeping ever closer to Pine Valley's front door. By the time dusk settled that day, Tank's garage had become a hive of purposeful activity. A worn chalkboard now displayed a schedule of patrols, while a freshly pinned map of Pine Valley bristled with colored push pins indicating vulnerable businesses and known Iron Fang sightings. A half-dozen volunteers, ranging from an off-duty mail carrier to a retired schoolteacher, showed up in response to a quiet word-of-mouth call for help. Detective Morales, meticulously organized, handed out short-range radios and typed instructions, ensuring each volunteer knew where to watch and how to report suspicious activity. Tank felt a pang of guilt as he watched these everyday citizens gird themselves for a threat they never asked for. Ms. Fletcher, the school teacher, was well into her 60s and should have been enjoying a peaceful retirement, not scanning dark streets for dangerous bikers. But the fear shining in her eyes was tempered by fierce resolve. He saw that resolve in every volunteer. Pine Valley might be small, but its spirit was far from broken. Among the group, Paula from the clinic stepped forward. She wore a reflective vest and carried a first aid kit slung over her shoulder. "If they hurt anyone tonight, we need to be ready," she explained softly, lips pressed into a determined line. Tank nodded. "Thanks, Paula. Your help could be critical if things go sideways." Katie and Bryce took charge of the digital side of operations, stationing themselves at the back office to monitor the sawmill cameras and any emergency calls that might come in. They'd rigged a system to relay immediate alerts to every volunteer's phone, which Bryce jokingly called Pine Valley's version of a dispatch center. Tank appreciated the levity, even if the situation was grim. The plan was simple but necessary. Pairs of volunteers would patrol specific blocks or remain on standby in their vehicles, ready to converge on any hotspot. Detective Morales and Officer Chung drove an unmarked cruiser, weaving slowly through the streets, occasionally stopping to chat with residents who peeked nervously from behind curtains. Reggie's Diner became a sort of midtown checkpoint, with an agreement that if trouble erupted, folks would run there for safety. As the sky darkened, Tank climbed into his own truck, tuning the radio to the agreed-upon channel. He used to think small-town life was predictable. Oil changes in the morning, errands in the afternoon, dinner at the diner. Now he was behind the wheel, scanning deserted roads for signs of motorcycle headlights. It felt like a night patrol shift from years gone by, except this time the base he defended was made up of neighbors and friends rather than fellow Marines. Shortly after 10 o'clock, the first call crackled through the radio. "This is Ms. Fletcher," came a quavering voice. "3 motorcycles heading down Elm Street. They're moving slow." Tank's pulse jumped. He responded quietly, "Any sign they're stopping?" A pause crackled with static. "Not yet. They just passed the hardware store." He immediately relayed the information to Morales, who confirmed she'd head that way. Tank flicked on his headlights, decided to circle around a few blocks to approach from another angle. Pine Valley streets were eerily quiet, storefronts dark, a few porch lights glowing in the distance. Passing the post office, he thought he saw a silhouette slip around the corner. Tensing, he slowed, only to find it was a stray cat darting into the alley. Another radio call, this time from Reggie at the diner. "4 bikes passed here a minute ago, heading south. Didn't stop, just revved their engines real loud." The pattern repeated for the next hour. Glimpses of motorcycle headlights, engine roars, and chilling near misses. Yet no direct attack came. It felt like Delgado's men were testing the waters, wanting to see how the town would react. Or maybe they were biding their time, letting the tension mount. Around midnight, with no major incidents, the volunteers began to feel weary. Ms. Fletcher signed off, citing her age in the late hour. Others followed, citing early work shifts or family obligations. Tank couldn't blame them. Most people in Pine Valley had never stayed up this late outside of a New Year's celebration. Detective Morales, sounding resigned, radioed in, "Let's wrap up for tonight, folks. Good job staying alert. We'll regroup in the morning. Thompson, you copy?" Tank pressed the transmit button. "Copy that." Heading back to the garage. Yet, as he turned onto Main Street, a swirl of headlights in his rearview mirror caught his eye. 5, maybe 6 bikes, moving swiftly. He tensed, half expecting them to swarm. But they sped right past, giving him only a fleeting glimpse of patches bearing that snarling wolf emblem. They tore down the road, then vanished into the dark. It was a show of force, a blatant display to remind Pine Valley that the Iron Fang prowled the streets at will. Tank felt the weight of it in his chest. Even with a coordinated watch, they still couldn't pin down Delgado or his men. They were playing a game of cat and mouse, and it was unclear who was the hunter and who was the prey. Returning to the garage, Tank found Bryce and Katie yawning at the monitors. "Quiet at the sawmill tonight," Bryce mumbled, bleary-eyed. "Maybe they're shifting operations." Tank nodded, locking the garage door behind him. The town had survived another night unscathed, but the tension remained thick as oil in the air. If anything, the sporadic sightings only hinted that a bigger move might be coming. And he worried that no matter how vigilant they were, Delgado had the advantage of time, resources, and an appetite for destruction that Pine Valley could scarcely imagine. Morning broke with a bruised sky of purples and grays, reflecting the mood of Pine Valley's citizens. Though the previous night saw no direct attacks, the relentless specter of the Iron Fang hung over every conversation. Shop owners opened their doors cautiously, neighbors checked on each other with worried eyes, and kids walked to school with anxious parents in tow. Detective Morales arrived at the garage shortly after sunrise, wearing the weary look of someone who'd gotten minimal sleep. Special Agent Carter joined her. They both stepped into Tank's makeshift command center, an office crowded with wires, monitors, and stacks of notes. Katie offered them coffee, which they accepted gratefully. Carter set down a folder bursting with documents. "My request for federal support is officially in progress," she announced, though her tone was measured. "We'll need a few more days, but I've flagged Pine Valley as a hotspot for potential organized crime activity. We might see some backup soon." Morales let out a relieved sigh, removing her jacket to reveal a pistol holstered at her hip. "That's the best news I've heard in a while." Meanwhile, Delgado's men spent the night cruising around, revving engines. They didn't do much damage, but the psychological toll is real. Bryce, who'd been monitoring camera feeds from the sawmill, spoke up. "They moved one crate outside around 3 in the morning. The camera caught at least 4 guys transferring something into a black van. Couldn't see inside, but it's definitely suspicious." Carter leaned forward. "I'll have a tech team analyze the footage. That might be enough to get a warrant. If we can catch them mid-transfer, we could shut down the entire pipeline." Tugging a chair closer, Tank studied the laptop screen, which Bryce replayed in slow motion. Even through the grainy night vision, the glint of the van's license plate was visible. Carter quickly jotted it down. "We'll run this through the system. With any luck, it'll lead us to one of their shell corporations." Katie frowned, resting her chin on her hand. "But will that stop them from harassing the town?" "Even if we track down the corporation, Delgado's men are still here, on the ground." Morales weighed in. "If we pull out their funding, Delgado won't be able to pay his soldiers or bribe local officials. He might cut his losses and run, but that's also when cornered animals become most dangerous." The grim reality sank in. As the net tightened around Delgado, he might escalate violence to protect his interest. Tank felt a swirl of anger and protectiveness. He pictured the diner, the hardware store, the clinic, places he frequented, run by friends who trusted him. A single raid by the Iron Fang, armed to the teeth, could result in devastation. Paula's voice crackled through a walkie-talkie on the desk, startling them. "Tank, Morales, we need you at the clinic. Someone smashed a window overnight and left a note." The anxiety in her tone was palpable. "On our way," Morales answered swiftly, grabbing her jacket. Carter followed while Tank called out for Katie and Bryce to hold the fort. Minutes later, they arrived at the clinic to find Paula standing outside, clearly shaken. Her eyes darted around as though she expected an ambush. The front window was indeed shattered, shards of glass sparkling on the sidewalk like malevolent confetti. A slip of paper, scrawled with jagged black letters, lay taped to the door. "Treat our enemies, and you'll need a doctor yourself." Morales scanned the note with gloved hands. "This is a direct threat," she muttered. "They're warning the clinic not to help anyone who resists them." Paula clutched her arms, voice trembling. I took an oath to treat everyone. I can't just turn people away. But what if they come back? We have patients, older folks, kids. Tank's heart clenched at the sheer cruelty. You won't stand alone, he told Paula, his voice firm. We'll help you reinforce the clinic. Cameras, locks, whatever it takes. Carter snapped a photo of the note. This is more evidence of intimidation. Keep it safe, it'll help our case. Meanwhile, I'll see if we can expedite a protective detail. She paused, meeting Tank's gaze. Time's running out. Delgado's pushing the town to the brink. A swirl of anger and despair roiled in Tank's gut. Every line of the threat hammered home the Iron Fang's willingness to destroy anyone who stood in their way. They'd turned a small, innocent town into a target for terror. And for what? Profit, power, sadistic pleasure. Tank didn't care. He just knew that Pine Valley, for all its warmth, was not prepared for unbridled aggression. And yet, as Carter had hinted, the fuse was already lit. Standing among jagged glass and the shaky residents who looked to him for reassurance, Tank made a silent promise. Whatever it took, however far he had to go, he would ensure this malevolent force did not claim Pine Valley. Behind him, Morales placed a hand on Paula's shoulder, offering quiet comfort. In the distance, a siren wailed, one of the volunteer firefighters rushing to help. The sound cut through the morning hush like an omen. Later that afternoon, a small crowd gathered outside Tank's garage, forming a tense, impromptu assembly. Word of the clinic's vandalism had spread like wildfire through Pine Valley, stoking anger and fear. Reggie stood with arms folded, jaw clenched, while Ms. Fletcher dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. A few other residents milled around, murmuring about how the town had never seen such cruelty. Detective Morales and Special Agent Carter arrived, trying to maintain order. Stepping onto a small crate, Carter raised her voice to be heard over the rising chatter. Please, everyone, let's calm down. We understand your fear and frustration. We're working on getting more federal support to remove this threat for good. A grumbling murmur passed through the crowd. Some were reassured, others doubtful. Gabriel, the hardware store owner, spoke up. I can't even sleep at night, knowing they might come burn down my shop. Are we supposed to wait until they kill someone before real help arrives? His words echoed the palpable anxiety swirling among the townsfolk. Carter's expression tightened. We have to operate within the law, she said carefully, scanning the crowd. The best way to handle this is through proper channels. We're close to gathering the evidence we need. Reggie shook his head. They're criminals, ma'am. They don't follow laws. Before Carter could respond, Morales stepped forward. She's right that we need proof, but let's not forget we can protect ourselves in the meantime. Our community patrols might not be perfect, but they help. And we're coordinating with every honest law enforcement officer we have. A middle-aged woman named Karen, who ran a flower shop, raised a trembling hand. I just want to know if my children are safe walking to school. Are these bikers going to hurt them? Morales and Carter exchanged worried glances. Tank, standing off to the side, felt compelled to intervene. He gently eased through the crowd, his imposing form commanding attention. Listen, he began, voice resonant with the calm he'd mustered in crisis zones. I understand how scared everyone is. These bikers are bullies, but bullies thrive on fear. The more they sense it, the more they push. Heads turned toward him. Even Carter gave a slight nod, as if acknowledging that the town respected his words. We're not helpless, he continued. Yes, they have weapons and money, but we have something else, each other. If we stand united, share information, watch each other's backs, Delgado won't find it so easy to pick us off. The crowd's agitation simmered. A hushed stillness took over as they absorbed his words. Ms. Fletcher mustered a watery smile. You really think we can stand up to them? Tank's expression softened. I've seen underdogs win before. It takes courage, yes, but also strategy. We're not going to storm in recklessly. We'll gather evidence so the law can shut them down, and in the meantime we form a line of defense, one they don't expect. Morales seized the momentum. Agent Carter and I will do everything legally possible. In the meantime, if you see something, strange vehicles, suspicious people, report it. Don't confront them alone. A ripple of agreement murmured through the gathering. People started asking more constructive questions. Who to call, where to find cameras, how to coordinate with the volunteer group. Carter handed out a few pamphlets with hotline numbers and tips, while Morales urged everyone to keep in contact with her or Officer Chung. Slowly, the assembly began to disperse, worried faces replaced by at least a faint glimmer of resolve. Tank stayed behind, exchanging a few quiet words with Carter. The federal agent rubbed her temples, looking drained. "You've got a knack for rallying them," she noted. "They trust you." He offered a half shrug. "They see me as a neighbor who fixes their cars. They don't realize I've done worse things in war zones." Carter gave him a keen look. Sometimes that's exactly who people need. A neighbor with a past they might not fully understand. Someone who can stand strong when they can't. Tank let that sink in, swallowing the lump in his throat. He'd come to Pine Valley to escape the violence of his old life, but fate had drawn him back into a conflict. At least this time the cause was personal, protecting friends, saving an entire town that had welcomed him as one of its own. Katie and Bryce emerged from the garage office, armed with updated camera data. "The sawmill cameras are quiet today," Katie reported, "but that might change tonight. They usually move after dark." Carter nodded, adjusting her blazer. "We'll keep watch. I'll be in touch if I hear back from my superiors. Hang tight, everyone." With that, she and Morales headed off, presumably to follow more leads. As the crowd fully dispersed, Tank felt a flicker of pride in how the townspeople had responded. Nervous but determined. Yet he was also haunted by the knowledge that if Delgado forced a violent showdown, the real burden of conflict would land on him, Morales, Carter, and maybe a few deputies. Small-town unity helped, but it wasn't bulletproof. The wind picked up, rustling stray leaves along the pavement. Tank looked across the street at Reggie's diner, the flower shop, the post office, each a symbol of ordinary life, now overshadowed by an extraordinary threat. He vowed silently to defend these places for as long as it took, even if it meant tapping deeper into the sniper's mindset he'd tried so hard to leave behind. For Pine Valley, for the people who believed in him, he would become that guardian, both mechanic and warrior, forging a path toward the day when they could once again live without fear. True to the predictions, nightfall brought renewed tension. Around 9, Bryce alerted Tank that the sawmill camera feeds showed vans arriving. Katie pulled up the live feed in the back office, projecting it onto a larger monitor. Tank, Morales, and Carter crowded around, watching grainy figures unload crates into the dilapidated structure. Every so often, a headlight swept across the camera view, revealing bikers standing guard. "This is it," Carter murmured, penning furious notes. "We might finally catch them in a major act of smuggling." Morales set her phone to record the footage straight from the screen. "If we get enough, a federal raid could be authorized. We should call in the state police to set up a perimeter." Yet before they could finalize a plan, another call crackled through the makeshift dispatch line. Reggie's voice quavered. "They're outside my diner. Half a dozen of them. They said they're coming in to collect a fee. I told them I can't pay." Tank's heart lurched. The diner was a prime target, a popular gathering spot that symbolized the town's communal spirit. If Delgado's men were moving on it now, it might be a distraction or even a violent demonstration. Morales grabbed her car keys. "I'll head there. Carter, you stay and keep logging this footage. Tank, coming with me?" He didn't hesitate. "Yes, Bryce, Katie, stay on these cameras. If anything changes at the sawmill, let us know immediately." They sped through the nearly deserted streets in Morales' unmarked car. The tension inside the vehicle was palpable, each passing block feeling like a step closer to a confrontation that might define Pine Valley's fate. Rounding the final corner, they arrived at the diner to find a group of bikers standing by the entrance, their leather vests reflecting the neon sign. Reggie stood inside, trembling hands visible through the glass door. Morales parked with the lights off. She and Tank stepped out cautiously. The bikers noticed them immediately, spreading out in an intimidating semicircle. A tall, lean man with a shaved head seemed to be the leader of this particular crew. He tapped a crowbar against his palm, a mocking grin on his face. "Evening, officer," he sneered, nodding toward Morales. "We're just here for a friendly collection. Don't want any trouble, do you?" Tank squared his shoulders, stepping beside Morales. "The diner's closed. You folks should leave." The man snorted. And who are you, her sidekick? Or maybe the big hero mechanic we've heard about? He eyed Tank's broad frame with amused contempt. Morales flashed her badge. I'm telling you to vacate the premises, unless you want me to arrest you for trespassing and intimidation. A few of the bikers snickered, exchanging looks. Lady, you have no idea who you're messing with, the leader said, voice taking on an edge. We have more men than you have cops, and we've got bigger guns. Delgado says we collect. We collect. At Delgado's name, Tank's anger flared, but he kept his voice steady. Delgado's not here right now, is he? He let the question hang, hoping to sow doubt. Think about it. He's off somewhere, leaving you to face the heat. The man's face twitched, but he covered it with a sneer. You trying to scare me, old man? Because I ain't scared. Morales moved her hand near her holster. Last warning, leave peacefully or I will detain you. For a moment, it seemed like the bikers might rush them. Tension hung like a live wire, ready to snap. But the leader took a step back, glancing at his men. Not worth it, he muttered. We'll be back, though. Count on that. With a rev of engines, they mounted their bikes and peeled away, the roar echoing through the dark. Inside the diner, Reggie emerged from behind a flipped table, face pale. Thank God, he breathed, voice shaking. I thought they were going to wreck the place. Or worse. Morales lowered her guard. We should still take a statement. Document every threat. She eyed the shattered cup on the floor. They break anything? Reggie gestured to a few scattered chairs. Just toss stuff around, no real damage yet. But they warned me that if I don't pay next time. His voice trailed off, the implication clear. Tank gently set a hand on the man's shoulder. You did the right thing, Reggie. If you give in once, you'll never be free. Even as he spoke the words, a sense of unease settled in his gut. Delgado's men had retreated, but not because they were frightened. This felt more like a test, a calculated show of force, letting the town know they could strike at will. Morales took photos of the disarray, promising Reggie that a report would be filed. Yet they all knew that a piece of paper alone wouldn't stop the Iron Fang. Heading back to the Kirin car, Morales' phone buzzed and Katie on the line. They're loading more crates at the sawmill, she whispered urgently. 3 vans now. Looks big. Tank exchanged a grim look with Morales. Pine Valley was split between 2 simultaneous fronts, direct intimidation at local businesses and large-scale smuggling at the sawmill. The Iron Fang was stretching the town's defenses to the brink, using fear and strategic cunning. We have to make a move soon, Tank muttered as they sped off into the night, or we'll lose what little control we have. By midnight, the tension in Pine Valley had reached a fever pitch. Morales, Carter, and Tank convened back at the garage, analyzing fresh footage of the sawmill in near real time. The cameras revealed multiple vans pulling up, men rolling out crates, and occasional glints of what could only be firearms under the flickering overhead lights. The operation had grown so blatant that it resembled a small-scale military installation rather than a hidden smuggling hub. They're not even trying to be subtle anymore, Katie breathed, eyes glued to the monitor. She and Bryce had done their best to enhance the video quality, but the feed was still murky. They must feel confident we can't stop them. Carter paced in tight circles, phone in hand. I've just sent the footage to my superiors. If this doesn't prompt a rapid response, I don't know what will. She looked ready to hurl her phone at the wall in frustration. I can't stand waiting. This is obviously a major criminal operation. But bureaucracy is slow. Morales rested a calming hand on Carter's arm. We've done what we can. Let's keep pushing. Turning to Tank, she added, we need to coordinate with local deputies for a possible interception if Delgado tries to move those crates out of town. But we can't engage them alone. There might be 15 or 20 armed men. Tank nodded grimly, recollecting his Marine days. A force of that size, well-armed, could easily outgun small-town police. What if we track them, let them drive off, then alert state troopers for a highway stop? Carter's eyes lit up. That could work, provided we get the troopers in the right place at the right time, and provided Delgado doesn't have them in his pocket. Morales exhaled. We'll have to risk it. The alternative is a shootout in the middle of Pine Valley, which I can't abide. Paula, who'd shown up to check on any potential injuries, sipped a cup of tea by the side. She spoke up softly. Some people in town are talking about taking matters into their own hands if help doesn't come soon. Vigilante talk. They're scared. Bryce shook his head, face drawn. A bunch of civilians with hunting rifles can't face professional criminals with automatic weapons. Tank felt a pang of sympathy for those frightened townsfolk. They're desperate, he said quietly, and desperation can lead to bad decisions. A hush fell over the group. On the monitors, more vehicles arrived at the sawmill. Delgado himself came into view, stepping from the passenger seat of a sleek SUV. Even in the blurry night vision, his imposing figure was unmistakable, a presence that emanated cold confidence. He walked among the crates, gesturing sharply. After a brief conversation with one of his underlings, he lit a cigarette, the ember glowing like a tiny flare in the darkness. Carter zoomed in, capturing Delgado's face. "We've got him on camera, plain as day, overseeing an illegal shipment." She turned to Morales, eyes glowing with urgency. "This is enough for an arrest warrant, maybe more." Morales nodded. "We can get a judge to sign off, especially with your federal backing. But Delgado might be gone by the time it's processed." Tank watched as Delgado climbed back into his SUV, the vehicle rolling away. Could it be that Delgado was heading into town or leaving it? Fear gnawed at him. "We should brace for trouble," he advised. "He might try to provoke us again, like at the diner, or he could slip away." Just then, the radio crackled with Officer Chung's voice, urgent and clipped. "All units, we have multiple 911 calls. Shots fired near the hardware store. Send backup." Adrenaline surged. Morales snatched her car keys. "Let's go," she snapped to Carter and Tank. Katie and Bryce were left to watch the monitors, wide-eyed, as the three bolted out the door. They found the hardware store in chaos. Windows shattered, the door kicked in, and the faint smell of gunpowder hung in the cool night air. Gabriel crouched behind his cash counter, trembling. They shot at my windows," he stammered, eyes wild with shock. Officer Chung was on the scene, gun drawn, searching the aisles. "Suspects fled," he called out, frustration clear in his voice. Morales knelt by Gabriel, checking for injuries. "You okay? Did you see how many?" I think 2 or 3, he choked out. "They shouted something about paying up. When I said I had nothing, they fired at the glass. I ducked." A wave of fury and protectiveness rippled through Tank. His mind flashed to the burning wreckage he'd seen in war zones, the traumatized civilians he'd once tried to protect. Now it was happening in Pine Valley. "Any sign of their bikes or plates?" he asked quietly, scanning the debris. Gabriel shook his head, eyes brimming with tears. "No, they vanished." Carter tapped Morales' shoulder. "We're spread too thin. Sawmill on one side, random attacks on the other. Delgado's dividing us." Morales helped Gabriel to his feet, urging him to gather any bullet casings or evidence. "I'll call it in, but this is an escalation. We can't be everywhere at once." As sirens in the distance grew louder, a new chill blanketed the scene. If the Iron Fang's aim was to terrorize, they were succeeding. Even with the best efforts of local law enforcement and the promise of federal backup, Pine Valley teetered on the brink of chaos. Tank caught the reflection of the flashing police lights in a shard of broken glass and was struck by the stark reality. The Iron Fang was waging psychological warfare, forcing them to chase multiple crises. Standing beside a trembling Gabriel, Tank laid a reassuring hand on the man's shoulder. But inside, he was seething. Delgado and his gang had turned a quiet mountain town into a crucible of fear. And Oliver Tank Thompson, once a sniper who'd taken down high-value targets under the cloak of night, knew that sometimes the only way to end a siege was to strike at its heart. The question was how and whether he could do it in time to save Pine Valley from a fate that was rapidly drawing near. By the next afternoon, the atmosphere in Pine Valley was a mix of seething anger and paralyzing worry. News of the hardware store shooting spread like wildfire, and nearly every conversation turned to the Iron Fang, or what might happen next. Some families quietly packed vehicles, preparing to flee to relatives in safer counties. Others boarded up windows, nailed shut doors, and dug out old rifles from storage sheds. The town was unraveling. Detective Morales, Agent Carter, and Tank convened in the garage's back office. They looked over a detailed map of Pine Valley, marking recent incidents with red pins. Vandalism at the diner, the threat at the clinic, The shooting at the hardware store. A cluster of pins near the sawmill indicated sightings of loaded vans, possibly leaving with contraband. The visual was sobering, an entire community under siege from multiple angles. We have a judge's preliminary approval for an arrest warrant on Delgado, Carter announced, tapping a freshly signed document. We can move in legally if we know where he is, but he's slippery and half his men are still out there. Morales rubbed her temple, fatigue etched in her features. He's playing whack-a-mole with us, showing up, disappearing, letting his crew handle the rest. We can't pin him down unless we catch him in the act. Bryce and Katie hovered by the laptop station, occasionally glancing at the sawmill feeds. What if we corner them at the sawmill? Bryce suggested, pushing up his glasses nervously. Wait until they're all together moving crates. Morales shook her head. We'd need SWAT-level forces for that. Even if we had local cops, we'd be outgunned. We need federal backup. Carter nodded. I've expedited the request. They're mobilizing a team, but it might be 48 hours minimum. Delgado could do a lot of damage in that time, or slip away entirely. A heavy silence fell. Tank recalled how battles in war zones sometimes turned on a single decisive action, cutting off supply lines, capturing a commander, or staging an ambush to break the enemy's morale. He eyed the map. If Delgado's main operation is at the sawmill, that's his lifeblood. Without it, he can't move product. Maybe we don't assault it outright, but we can sabotage it enough to slow them down. The suggestion lingered. Carter's brow furrowed. Sabotage? You're talking about a covert operation. That's risky and technically illegal without a warrant. I know, Tank admitted, but if we do something subtle, disrupt their vehicles, jam their comms, maybe we buy time until your federal team arrives. Morales considered it, chewing her lip. We are in a crisis. Delgado's borderline domestic terrorism, and we have the justification to protect our town. Still, any direct action has to be carefully planned. If we screw up, people die. Katie, eyes darting between them, chimed in. We have some hardware that could jam low-level signals, like walkie-talkies or short-range radios. Bryce rigged it up from old electronics. And if we sneak onto the property, maybe we can plant trackers on their vans so the feds know exactly where the shipments go. Carter exhaled, half impressed, half wary. That's bold, but Delgado's men are armed. If they see you, it could be a shootout. Tank's gaze hardened. I know, but I also know how to move undetected. The words tasted bitter, reminding him of missions past. He'd come to Pine Valley to escape that life, yet here he was, volunteering to risk it all again. We can't just sit while they terrorize the town. I'm willing to take the risk, but we'll need a plan. Over the next hour, they hashed out possibilities. The final sketch was precarious. Under cover of darkness, Tank and a small team, maybe Morales or an officer, would infiltrate the sawmill perimeter. They'd plant a few signal disruptors, attach GPS trackers to the vans if possible, and slip out. Meanwhile, Carter would stand by with local patrols, ready to respond if an alarm was raised. As the conversation wrapped, the weight of it all settled on Tank's shoulders. This was a far cry from the daily routine of fixing brakes and changing oil. He locked eyes with Katie and Bryce, who looked both terrified and inspired. You two, stay out of it physically, he said firmly. We'll need your tech skills guiding us from the garage, monitoring cameras and the trackers. But no on-site involvement, understand? They nodded, relief mingling with concern. Morales rose, collecting her files. Let's do it tonight. Delgado's men tend to move big shipments past midnight. If we're lucky, we can slip in when they're not expecting it. Before leaving, Carter caught Tank's arm. Be cautious. This is crossing into paramilitary territory. You sure you're up for it? His eyes flicked to the map, then to the battered walls of the garage that had become a war room. He pictured Reggie's traumatized face, Paula's shaky hands, Gabriel's shattered windows, and all the other townspeople living in fear. I have to be, he replied quietly, the old soldier's determination rising in him like a tide. I can't let Delgado tear this place apart. With that, the plan was set. As evening approached, Pine Valley's battered serenity gave way to a tense anticipation. The local watch resumed their patrols, unaware of the clandestine operation about to unfold. And in the back of Tank's mind, a single sobering thought took root. Wars often hinge on a small group's willingness to do the impossible, and tonight, that group would be them. Night descended like a velvet shroud over Pine Valley, the moon hidden behind thick clouds that promised rain. Tank, Detective Morales, and Officer Chung gathered in the garage, double-checking gear. Their plan hinged on stealth. They would park a good distance from the sawmill, approach on foot, and deploy the devices that Bryce and Katie had prepared. The devices themselves were small, palm-sized circuits encased in plastic, each designed to scramble short-range communication within a limited radius. If placed discreetly near the vans, they might hamper the Iron Fang's ability to coordinate. "This is insane," Officer Chung whispered, loading extra rounds into his service pistol. "But if we don't do something, Delgado's going to overrun us." Morales zipped up her jacket, concealing her badge. "Just remember, we're trying to avoid confrontation. We plant the disruptors, attach trackers if possible, and get out. If things go south, you follow Tank's lead." The man in question wore dark jeans and a black hoodie, a far cry from his usual grease-stained coveralls. He felt the old tension in his muscles, the same jittery calm he'd experienced on sniper missions. Each breath was measured, each thought meticulously sorted. "We only engage if absolutely necessary," he repeated, voice low. "No heroics." Bryce and Katie hovered near the surveillance station. "We'll be monitoring from here," Bryce said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Cameras, police channels, everything. If you need a quick exit, call. We'll do what we can to distract them electronically." Tank gave the teenager's shoulder a reassuring squeeze, then met Katie's eyes. She looked frightened but resolute. "Lock up after we leave. Don't open the doors for anyone but Carter," he warned. With that, they set out. Officer Chung drove an old sedan to avoid suspicion, headlights off until they reached a back road that looped around to the forest behind the sawmill. Rain started to fall in a soft drizzle, masking their footsteps on damp leaves. They parked the sedan in a thicket, a quarter-mile from the sawmill, and continued on foot. Adrenaline hummed in Tank's veins as they crept through the pines. Darkness enveloped them, broken only by the faint glow of the sawmill's lights in the distance. Through an earpiece linked to Bryce's station, Tank heard a soft voice. "We see at least 3 vans near the loading bay, 2 guards posted outside the main door." Morales repeated the intel to Chung, who nodded, sweat beading on his forehead despite the chill. The group slowed as they reached a rusted chain-link fence. An older section had collapsed, providing an entry point. Tank motioned them to crouch low, scanning the yard. His gaze caught a flicker of movement, a guard with a flashlight, patrolling the perimeter. They waited until he turned his back, slipping through in a soundless shuffle. Heart pounding, Tank led the way to a cluster of broken-down pallets near the loading bay. The vans loomed like dark silhouettes, their windows tinted. Through the gloom, he could see men moving crates inside. The rancid smell of stale water and industrial decay clung to the air. Every scrape of a footstep or distant clank of metal set his nerves on edge. With hand signals, he directed Morales to slip around one van, while Chung took another. Each carried a small disruptor unit. Tank waited, breath tight, as they carefully placed the devices under the vehicle's undercarriages. A single misplaced step or accidental clang could alert the guards. Rain dripped from the roof in intermittent splashes, masking their movements. Soon, Morales returned, giving a thumbs up. Chung followed, though his breathing was ragged with tension. Step 1 was done. Next came the trackers, which were slightly larger, needing a metal surface to cling to for stable GPS signals. The trio snaked around the side of the second van. Tank was about to plant a tracker when a door opened, flooding the area with harsh fluorescent light. Freezing in place, they heard footsteps and agitated voices. "We're behind schedule," a man barked. "Delgado wants this loaded and gone by sunrise." Tank pressed himself flat against the van, silently praying no one would walk around it. Morales crouched beside him, hand on her holster, every muscle rigid. The footsteps drew near, then paused. Another voice muttered, Yeah, let's just finish up." A moment later, the footsteps retreated, and the door slammed shut, darkness reclaiming the loading bay. Exhaling shakily, Tank attached the tracker near a rear wheel well. Chung did the same on another van. They eased away, having placed 3 disruptors and 2 trackers. A partial victory, but enough to hamper communications and trace at least one route. They retreated to the fence, adrenaline spiking anew when a guard's flashlight swept across the yard. Dropping to a prone position, they waited as the beam skimmed overhead. Rain pattered on Tank's hood, trickling down his neck. The tension was unbearable. Then, mercifully, the guard walked on. Finally, they slipped back through the fence and melted into the trees. Once they reached the sedan, Officer Chung let out a shaky laugh. "I can't believe we did that." Morales tapped her earpiece. "Bryce, Katie, come in. We're clear. Starting the car now." A chorus of relieved voices filled the line. Bryce's excited babble, Katie's short gasp of relief. "You're amazing," Katie breathed. "We were so scared you'd get caught." Tank started the engine, headlights still off. "We'll celebrate later," he said, voice laced with cautious hope. "Let's just get home safe, check if the trackers are transmitting, and we'll see what Delgado does next." As they drove back, a silent sense of accomplishment mingled with dread. They had pricked the Iron Fang's operation, but the real question loomed. How would Delgado respond if he discovered the sabotage? For now, though, they had gained a crucial edge, potential real-time insight into the gang's movements. And in a conflict where knowledge was power, that edge might be the turning point Pine Valley desperately needed. At the crack of dawn, the news arrived in a flurry of phone calls and frantic messages. Several of Delgado's vans had stalled during the night, electronics inexplicably malfunctioning, while another 2 had departed the sawmill carrying unknown cargo. Katie and Bryce, glued to their monitors, confirmed that the trackers on those 2 vans were pinging steadily, broadcasting their locations along a rural highway. Agent Carter, equally alert, mobilized state troopers to intercept them. Tank, Morales, and Chung, weary but wired from the night's operation, converged at the garage to follow the unfolding drama. A radio perched on the workbench crackled with police chatter. Carter's voice emerged amidst static. "Troopers engaged near mile marker 72. Shots fired, requesting immediate backup." Morales cursed under her breath, grabbing the radio. "We're on our way. Hang tight." She, Tank, and Chung bolted out, piling into 2 separate vehicles. Katie and Bryce stayed behind, eyes locked on digital maps showing blinking dots representing the vans. The tension was suffocating. Pine Valley's entire battle with the Iron Fang seemed to hinge on what happened in these next few hours. Driving at breakneck speed, they reached the highway to find a scene of chaos. Patrol cars blocked the road, lights strobing across wet asphalt. Officers crouched behind open doors, firearms trained on a black van riddled with bullet holes. Another van lay flipped on its side, smoke curling from the hood. Delgado's men, some wounded, had tried to flee into the woods. A scattered group of troopers were chasing them, gunshots echoing in the morning mist. Tank parked behind a squad car. He spotted Carter crouched beside a trooper, scanning the tree line with a rifle. A wave of relief washed over him that she appeared uninjured. He rushed over, Morales and Chung flanking him. "Status?" Morales demanded, breath ragged. Carter aimed her rifle. "We took out the driver of the first van. The second crashed. They're pinned, but dangerous." She pointed to an officer who was receiving first aid by the roadside. "One trooper down with a shoulder wound. He'll live." Tank's eyes swept across the battered vans. He glimpsed crates in the open cargo area, some spilling out, rifles, ammunition, and smaller boxes that might be narcotics. The scale of it hammered home the truth. This was no petty gang. The Iron Fang was a fully equipped paramilitary outfit. Morales turned to Chung. "Stay with the wounded. I'm going to assist in the takedown." Just then, a figure in a black vest broke from the tree line, sprinting across the highway. Carter and Tank tensed, but the man raised his hands, dropping his weapon. "Don't shoot!" he yelled, terror plain in his voice. Another trooper tackled him to the ground. A second biker, however, fired a wild shot before diving behind an embankment. Tank's marine reflexes kicked in. He dropped to a knee, scanning for an angle. Carter fired a warning shot, the bullet cracking off the asphalt. Then Morales sprinted to flank the embankment. Within seconds, the forest erupted in shouts. A trooper's voice rang out, "He's fleeing east!" For a moment, Tank considered pursuing, but the immediate threat near the vans seemed contained. He spotted Delgado nowhere. Carter panted beside him, rifle still raised. They must have left Delgado behind or at another location. But we got the cargo. This is huge, she breathed, adrenaline shining in her eyes. The next hours were a blur of arrests, ambulance sirens, and evidence collection. Troopers carefully cataloged each crate, snapping photos of the weapons and possible narcotics. Carter confirmed that this haul alone could put Delgado's enterprise in jeopardy if tied to him directly. Morales strode up to Tank, her face a mixture of relief and fatigue. It's not over yet, but this is a major blow to the Iron Fang. Delgado lost a big shipment and a bunch of his men. Tank exhaled, feeling a surge of weary triumph. Maybe now, Pine Valley can breathe a little. But Delgado's still out there, and he'll want revenge. Carter joined them, an open crate of rifles in her hand. We'll keep the pressure on. With this evidence, I can push for more federal resources. Delgado's operation is crumbling. We just have to corner him. They shared a moment of unity, acknowledging the weight of what they'd accomplished and the danger still ahead. When they returned to Pine Valley, news had already spread that the highway bust had crippled the Iron Fang's immediate distribution line. Gabriel, Paula, and Reggie greeted them at the garage with cautious hope. Even Miss Fletcher arrived, tearfully thanking Morales for standing up to the criminals. Yet Tank couldn't fully rejoice. His mind replayed the imagery of troopers pinned down, bullets flying near the crash site. This was the cost of war, even in a quiet mountain town. He thought of Bryce and Katie, who'd done their part from behind monitors, but were too young to witness the brutality face to face. And he wondered if Delgado, cornered, might lash out with something worse. Night approached again, and Pine Valley found itself in an uneasy lull, one shipping route destroyed, but the ringleader still at large. Tank walked home in the drizzle, exhaustion weighing on every step. For the first time in days, he allowed himself to hope that they might turn the tide. Yet a nagging voice in his head reminded him that a wounded animal, or a wounded warlord, was often the most dangerous adversary of all. Over the following week, Pine Valley's battered spirit rallied. With a significant portion of Delgado's weapons and men taken down on the highway, the Iron Fang's grip loosened. Morale soared as volunteers helped one another board up damaged storefronts, repaint vandalized walls, and rebuild shattered windows. Detective Morales and Agent Carter worked tirelessly, coordinating with state and federal agencies to process the evidence seized from the crashed vans. Stories of heroism circulated: how a trooper saved a wounded colleague under fire, how a local teenager provided crucial intel, and how everyday citizens banded together to chase away fear. Tank's garage remained the central hub for these efforts, computers buzzing with updated camera feeds and radio chatter. Bryce and Katie, exhausted but proud, continued to monitor digital channels for any sign of Delgado's whereabouts. Every new day felt like a cautious step back toward normalcy. The diner reopened with a pay or pray graffiti painted over by volunteer artists, turning an emblem of terror into a mural of defiance. Gabriel's hardware store offered discounts to townsfolk fortifying their homes, and Paula's clinic saw fewer anxiety attacks and more routine checkups. Yet the shadow of Delgado's presence lingered. Rumors persisted that he was hiding somewhere in the region, possibly plotting revenge or regrouping with outside help. Special Agent Carter, aware of his likely desperation, reminded everyone that a cornered criminal was the most unstable kind. Morales remained on high alert, encouraging residents to stick to their patrol schedule, just in case. It was mid-afternoon when the calls came. A tip from an anonymous source claimed Delgado had been spotted near an abandoned farmhouse on the outskirts of Pine Valley. The source mentioned a black SUV with heavily tinted windows, his signature ride. Carter, Morales, and a team of state troopers mobilized immediately. Tank, though not officially law enforcement, felt compelled to join. He couldn't shake the responsibility he felt toward the town he'd come to love. They arrived at the farmhouse to find it eerily quiet. The troopers set up a perimeter, guns trained on broken windows and a sagging front porch. Carter and Morales took the lead, stepping cautiously up the creaking steps. Tank followed at a distance, scanning the tree line for any sign of ambush. Inside, dust motes danced in the filtered light through cracked boards. The air smelled stale, tinged with decay. A quick sweep of the rooms revealed old furniture, torn upholstery, and scattered debris. But no Delgado. Tension rose as they realized the tip might be a trap or a decoy. Then a sudden noise, footsteps overhead. Morales signaled everyone to hold position. A trooper pointed to a narrow staircase leading to an attic. Carter nodded and two troopers advanced, rifles raised. Tank's heart pounded, memories of clearing hidden sniper nests flooding his mind. The attic door creaked as they pushed it open, revealing a cramped space lit by a single window. For a moment, all he could see was dust swirling in a shaft of light. Then Delgado emerged from behind a half-collapsed wall, pistol drawn. Shots rang out, echoing painfully in the small attic. One trooper dove aside, bullet splintering wood. Carter returned fire, the muzzle flash illuminating Delgado's furious expression. Morales yelled, "Drop your weapon!" Her voice ricocheted off the rafters, but Delgado laughed, a low, menacing sound. Another shot clipped a trooper's shoulder, sending him sprawling. Carter's second shot found its mark, grazing Delgado's arm. He winced but held firm, cornered like a rabid animal. Tank's instincts overrode caution. He lunged forward using his larger frame to tackle Delgado's gun arm. Pain seared through his shoulder as Delgado's pistol fired again, the bullet digging into the attic floor. They wrestled, the cramped attic thick with the smell of gunpowder and fear. Delgado was strong, wiry and relentless, but Tank's mass and training gave him the advantage. He wrenched the pistol free, sending it skittering across the floorboards. Carter and Morales closed in, guns aimed. Breathing hard, Delgado glared at them with undisguised hatred. Blood trickled from the graze on his arm. "You'll never stop the Iron Fang," he spat, eyes wild. "We have backers everywhere." Carter handcuffed him, reading his rights. "We have enough evidence to bury you," she hissed, "and your backers." Delgado's contemptuous sneer faltered, replaced by a flicker of fear. Tank, chest heaving, rose to his feet, rubbing his sore shoulder. The trooper who'd been shot in the shoulder groaned, but he'd survive. Outside, more officers swarmed in, ensuring no escape route remained. Minutes later, Delgado was led out in cuffs, his bravado evaporating. The news spread like lightning through Pine Valley. The ringleader had been captured, the Iron Fang's reign broken. Residents poured into the streets in cautious celebration, hugging each other and crying tears of relief. The sense of collective victory was palpable. But perhaps no one felt it more deeply than Oliver "Tank" Thompson, who stood watching from a distance, heart pounding with the realization that his quiet mountain refuge could finally breathe free again. In the days that followed, Pine Valley returned to the routines that once defined it. Morning coffee at Reggie's Diner, lazy strolls through Main Street, friendly waves between neighbors. Some scars, physical and emotional, would linger. Boarded up windows, deep-seated anxiety, and an awareness that violence could strike anywhere. Yet the community emerged stronger, bound by a shared struggle and the knowledge that even a small town could stand up to a formidable threat when united. For Tank, life at the garage began to settle into something resembling normal. He continued teaching Bryce new mechanical techniques, teased Katie about her adept spy skills, and welcomed Paula's frequent check-ins. Each day he woke to the reassuring hum of wrenches, engines, and camaraderie, feeling grateful that Pine Valley, his chosen home, had survived its greatest trial. And whenever a memory of that attic wrestling match flashed in his mind, he reminded himself that for all the darkness the world could bring, there were always those willing to fight for the light, even in the unlikeliest of places. Looking back on everything Tank and the townspeople endured, from tense standoffs under dark skies to the triumphant takedown of a powerful crime ring, it's clear this wasn't just a fight for safety, but a testament to courage and solidarity. Pine Valley proved that even when danger looms and odds seem impossible, an entire community working together can push back. Friendships strengthened, new leaders emerged, and a once terrified town rediscovered its own resilience. Now that you've heard the story, we'd love to hear from you. Did Tank's bravery inspire you? Which moment surprised you the most? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and let's discuss what we can learn from Pine Valley's victory. And if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more gripping tales that celebrate hope, tenacity, and the power of coming together when it matters most.